forgot to tell you, Rob, we have about 10 people living in this house. It's just that we keep them under control when we have.
Listen, if I don't see your face, then you don't matter.
Right. Okay.
If I don't see your face, it don't matter.
We got to get serious now. Serious. Okay. So on this beautiful spring day, because we're not in summer yet until I think tomorrow morning, actually, I think. So we ask for the guidance and wisdom of the ancestors who went before us and those whose lives were lost in the Middle Passage as we commune on a weekly basis in this book club to study Yurugu. We ask that the ancestors hold and guide us while we go through this Sunday evening of Yurugu education. As we pour libations, I would like you to keep in mind and any ancestors whom to you embody the principles that guide you in your walking in your life day to day. And we also hope that they are ancestors who will embody the following principles. The response as we pour the libation is Ashe, which means so be it. So we pour libations for all who dare to define, defend, and develop our interests as people. We say,
Ashe.
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 We pour for our ancestral land. We say, Ashe.
Ashe.
For our
Ashe.
people then and now, we say,
Ashe.
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 For our children and those yet unborn, we say,
Ashe.
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 We pour for Kawaida, the Nguzo Saba, and Ma'at, and we say,
Ashe.
Ashe.
We pour for the systems of views and values which give identity and purpose to our lives. We say,
Ashe.
Ashe.
For the new world we struggle to build and for the continuing struggle to reconstruct and reconnect our history and humanity in our own image and words according to our needs. We say, Ashe.
Ashe.
We ask the ancestors that they drink heartily and they quench their thirst. Monikasa, it is finished, it is done. Ashe.
Ashe.
Ashe. Well, people, I'm glad that mostly everybody made it. And I'm glad that Robert made it because I wasn't sure if you got the email because Niyami said he didn't get the email, which I'm sure he did, but because I sent that out so early, you know. See, yeah. I like his wife. She always backs me up in the background. Like, but as you can see, we're almost there, people. We're almost there.
Yeah,
And you gotta watch that laugh, that smile. There's 5 different smiles in one. So
no, but I understand. I understand that energy. She's giving me that, you know, that spiritual energy. You know, that EFI energy. You know, so I don't have a tough time understanding spirituality. I'm philosophical and logical. But this subject matter that we're dealing with is one of importance. I think this chapter here is going to help people understand what the Asili, what she meant by the Asili. So my question is, in terms of how does the European Asili affect what she quotes the other, and let me personalize it, affect us, you know, and in what way? So everybody could quickly jump in and try to answer. Raise your hands who got something to say.
Can you repeat the question again, Ron?
I said the question is, how does the Asili, the European Asili, how does that affect the other? Well, let me put it like this. How are we affected by this European Asili? And in what way? In what way? Like, what are the effects?
Well, when I was reading, what I see is that it's like an abused child, abused child, when he gets older, he becomes an abuser. And when I was reading it, I see the same cultural characteristics now in Black people that their asili have created of objectifying other people, objectifying other cultures, objectifying women. I see it, that's what I was seeing. I said, man, we're acting just like that. So we have been around them so long and so affected by them that we're thinking that behavior is natural. It's a natural human behavior to objectify other people that's not like us. Like now you have the adults movement in America.
Well,
So-called American.
let me ask you this question in regards to what you're saying, because I want to you be a little bit more specific. So you're saying that we have the European asili, or are you saying this is an effect of the European asili?
This is an effect. Because as I was reading, the asili is born out of their culture, where they developed from. So we didn't develop in that area. It's part of their culture.
Well, it's in reverse. Because of their asili, you get this culture.
Yeah. Well, I meant when I say culture, I was meaning environment. I was meaning the environment.
Same thing. Because of the asili, they create this environment.
But when I was reading, it was more because they was born in that environment. They developed that culture.
Okay, what you're talking about the North, like when they were in the North, separated. Okay. Yeah, but the remember, we have to understand there's a need, there's a specific, right? There's a need for power when dealing with the other. That's where I wanted you to go at. That's where I wanted to see if you could go there. Because they are made, remember, because even in the book, it talks about even when they have their own, in the last chapter, they treat themselves differently. Remember the conversation we were having last week, where they have their own, even though there's a other, at least within their own culture, they can say they're white. And they have that at least, right? And they're not treated like the others, you know?
Right. But what I was saying, that to me, it's a lot of devastation on our culture. But what I'm seeing the worst now is we are imitating all of that devastation within our own cultural norms. It's like we're mimicking. That's what I was taking from it. Like
Anybody got anything to add to that? I mean, it's part of if you look at that, right? It's part of that what the Christians did, right? In terms of their expansionism. And so what they do is you accept this worldview that they have, the appearance, not the reality. You're accepting the appearance that they created, and now you're living your life through that reality. And so this is how they're able to expand, and this is how they're able to gain even more power, because now you are a cogwheel to their power structure.
I like to ask, does anybody disagree that we're accepting we're making normal their culture?
I think that's one. I think what I get from what he's saying is something that's actually happening, but it's part of the whole system that's set up in such a way to draw everybody in and make you feel that this is how it has to be. Without
Yes.
questioning, like you really have to question why you're doing this and not just do it. You know what I'm saying? So we kind of we fit into the system as it is. And so in order to just do our daily functions, we become part of the system, like we're working from within. So that's why I could see what you're saying is that we kind of mimic, because it's the system that's in place already. We haven't developed our own, or we discarded what we have in the past, or it was taken away or beaten out of us. So now we functioning within this whole system. And so we take on some of that, it's a kind of, the laws are written in such a way that we have to follow certain patterns.
We if we don't follow it, there's certain repercussions, negative. I mean, it's a double-edged sword. You doom if you do, if you doom if you don't, right? And so it is a tough thing to deal with, because we're born into this matrix, right? And so my personal goal is to try to free myself from it, right? And every choice I make, I try to consciously make the least of the compromises, like, because of the fact that I know the harm it does, and it's to the point where, like, I personally feel enough is enough. We can't. I think what we're trying to accomplish in the West, it's not going to happen. I think we really need to unplug completely, like, and that's just my personal view. But that's what's going on, and it's part of their. Like I said, I want to tie it back to the other chapters, because it's part of this expansionism, this imperialistic expansionism, and it's not me, it's what she's describing as imperialistic expansionism, and also this idea of universalism, where they, like you said, Eugene, they make it seem like this is how it was. This is how human beings are always like this, and it's not true.
Yeah,
This is why
because
knowing history is important.
In order to get out of it, you can't just unplug. I think you have to create your own systems in order to actually, go in a different direction. Because once you function,
there are systems out there that we could just, adopt, and innately speaking, we have created our own system. There's a unique culture among us, even in the West, right? Because the danger for them is that we're always spiritual, even among the worst of us. There's a sense of spirituality. Because, for example, when I say the worst of us, look at gang life. Gang life is communal. I mean, there's an exercise of negative outcomes, but it's communal, and is an effect of something that has been taken from us. So we're exercising this communalism thing that we need, the spiritual thing, in a negative fashion, and we need to convert that into something more positive. I mean, that's how I'm looking at this in terms of the gangs. A lot of people yearn for being part of something and having a sense of purpose. And there's she describes in page 4.2 the Asili, right? And she and that second paragraph, the interpretation offered here leads to quite a different conclusion. The concept of the Asili help us to demonstrate the way in which the imperialistic expansionism and exploitative drive is inherent and therefore natural to the context of European culture. It is logically generated by the Asili of the culture. This activity and endeavor is not in any way peripheral to the main thrust of the culture. It is not merely an aspect among many unrelated characteristic. It is indeed a central theme in European behavior with origins in the core European ideology. White nationalism and aggression, both cultural and economical, are endemic to European culture, embedded in its ideological matrix. To reverse the tendency of which European imperialism is a manifestation would be to radically change the basis and the essential nature of the culture itself. In other words, we will be dealing with a different Asili, which in turn will generate a different Utamawazu and Utamaroho. So Eugene, when Eugene said we got to create our own, that's what will happen. We basically will create an Asili
Yeah.
that is different than
No, I think we all have an Asili, we all have a core to us. Like our core has some elements of spirituality and different things combined. So we have it. It's just that um, the way things are set up is that we we use it as much as we could, but we still have to, you know, do the things in order for us to, you know, to survive essentially, you know. So we it's not that we can't do it completely, but we kind of compromising along the way, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're really onto something there, because I think that because for us, if we're formulating or thinking about our Asili, it's not um, based on power. And because theirs is based on power and everything they do is a reflection of that. um, for us, that's why it is hard for us to really, although we copy, although we follow along, and that's basically become because of the hypocrisy that they have, their the, their ethics, right? We
rhetorical
buy,
ethics.
yeah, exactly, the rhetorical ethics, which again is hypocrisy. You know, they is not for them; it's actually for us, and because for we can relate to some of the things that they speak about, right? You're tending to follow what they say, not trying to do what they do, thinking that that's exactly how things are because they've presented themselves to us in this way in every single thing they do. And because they do have that power, and because they have that um, behavior that is, you know, supremacy and that sort of thing, they have no conscience. I would say there's no
Yeah.
conscience to anything that they do. While probably, and I mean, if we really were to study what Araceli was, I'm sure it will be based on that kind of a consciousness, right? I think that's why, like this chapter, reading this, um, in a way, I found it to be one of the simplest to understand, because the examples, everything, it was just read smooth to read and read, and like, you know, you can get through it, and you can, and every minute you're saying, uh-huh, yes, oh yes, and you know,
Yeah.
because it really spoke to exactly what we do, what we see, what we feel. And to me, it brought then a more like a aha moments of understanding just the real power that they have really exercised so much power over us. And because of how we feel or how we think, right, we don't challenge it. We don't challenge it. We just think that's the way it is, right? And I think it
What
happens a lot. Yeah,
I have
we
a
don't.
question.
Mhm.
Why do you think they have that power?
Because that's who they are. That's them.
Because
That's
we
their
gave
ceiling, right? It demands it. That's how they
no.
can. That's how they function. They
No,
can't
but why
function.
do they have it? Why do they have that power?
They created it. Their ceiling demands it. They have to.
They're given that power.
Mm,
Remember the
Yeah.
the chart?
Yeah.
yes. Hmm.
They have that power. 10% of the population controlling 90%. Their power is an illusion. They're given that power.
Yeah. Well, they use it well because yeah. Hmm.
Right? So if you look at that chart and you read over that chart, that tells you the whole step by step of how the others surrender their power.
Hmm.
Now, in this chapter, it deals with what they willing to do, right? to 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 have that level of control, right?
Hmm.
Right. That's
And
what I
that's
yeah.
what Carruthers would call, that's the genius of the European, the potential of him to commit the atrocities that he did. And in the book, they mention a lot of the ones we talked about in the past.
Hmm. Well, at the
So
bottom of that paragraph that you read to us, there were
mhm,
those questions that really, that she said, this is exactly what this whole chapter is going to do. It's going to
right.
tell you what kinds of conceptions of the world are needed for this, and what styles of action must be engendered in the inhabitants of the West to make them so driven and so controlled,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And it's true, when we go through the chapter here, she really picks up those elements. And as I say, they're so relatable. You see them happening. You can parallel them
They're
to just about everything.
contemporary. They're
Hmm.
contemporary, so we can really relate to them.
You can really, yeah, yeah. This is fascinating. Really.
Anybody else?
I think the power it's part of the violence in acquiring the power as well, right? And that's what they use to acquire the power. And then, you know, then it becomes, once that's acquired, then what it does, what they've managed to do very, I don't know, I mean, they really got into it, is to allow.
And the book is to describe that whole process,
Yeah.
right? Because basically you have certain compromises that allow them to get the power, like sending slaves here, for example, and then like the absence of history and knowing yourself, and then it continues this
Build-
whole idea that they think that they're better, and that push, right? And then remember that even in the book, in like 2 chapters before this, is it 2 or 3 chapters, we talk about materialism, the materialism we get. And so we have trade-offs, and the trade-offs are a disaster, right? Like, for example, I think they bought Manhattan with liquor and some beads of blankets or something like that, right? And this is how they were able to have Manhattan. Like, some weird stuff went on, and how their worldview, they continue to push their worldview. And let's not forget that part of it is the fear that they have of being the minority, the global minority.
Is part of the
The ge-
control. Sorry.
I was just
Is
gonna say
part of
the genetic annihilation from Francis Wilson. Sorry,
does
Sunshine, go ahead.
does part of the does this, what I say, fit into the concept of that the diagram that you show? For example, that they would try and control people by telling them that, okay, we discovered this land, and then they say how good the land is, but then they try and threaten them with war for the land. So that's how people surrender, because they're like, well, we need the land. So if we surrender, we'll get to stay here, but we'll follow the follow the, I guess, the way that I'm a little bit confused. Like, I'm feeling like I'm seeing in the part that it says expansion, and the expansionistic part of it, what she's trying to say is like,
Well, let the group answer the first part, right?
thank
Because
you.
the
Okay.
second part is a confusing part. Anybody want to deal with that first part, that what she says?
What is this again? It's
Okay, I'll try and like say it a little clearer, because I know I was a little choppy. So is this how the control works? Because if there's a less % of people controlling more people, they kind of tell them, impose what they should be thinking, so that they now start to feel like land and ownership and this is important. But then they start to come at them for war. For like, when it says expansionistic, I'm thinking that means that they'll fight for their land, they'll fight for what they discovered. So does that mean like they kind of create the need for the other to surrender, because they came and discovered it, then they tell them what it's supposed to be when it wasn't that for them, and now that they're going to take it away, they value it so much that they surrender and say, okay, well, here's the power, have the power, because we don't want you to take this from us, and if we do what you want, you won't take our land from us. I'm trying to see if that's what it means in expansionistic of territorial and economic expansion. Is that kind of how the cycle works?
Anybody want to try to tackle that one?
There is a definition on page 403,
403.
the second paragraph, about halfway down. Expansionism is the projection and imposition of the cultural ego on the world. It is possible to
Yes.
interpret, all manifestations of universalism in this way. It is the expression of arrogance, greed, and an obsession to consume all that is distinguished from self. In
So
this
good.
setting,
So there is a
discovered,
projection, definitely a
yes,
projection of like, this is how you should see it, even though the other may not have seen it this way. This is how they want you to see it,
and they impose it as well.
right? Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
Veronica, carry on reading, because
Yeah, I was gonna say. I
the
mean,
bit
you guys
about-
are touching all of my notes.
Huh?
All of my notes, you guys are
Yeah,
on the same page.
you see all the highlights for this one.
keep reading, Veronica, because I think the discovered piece is important.
Yes.
Okay.
In this
Yes.
setting,
Where am I now? Okay. All that's distinguished from the setting. In this setting, discovered phenomena automatically becomes areas to conquer, to be made ours. Okay. European expansionism is the delimitation and the redefinition of the world in terms of the European self, as opposed to the losing of self in the world or in the other. For us, it's like, we're losing, but for them, right, it is imposing their selves, which is the obliteration of the isolating boundaries of self. Yeah.
So I think it's important to know that, places were not just, they were discovered by them, but those places were existing before they came along.
Right.
Yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
That kind of reminds me of that saying, my way or the highway.
That's more or less what it is, I think.
My way or the highway, but we were here before you, but you still come and want to control.
And we didn't surrender necessarily. I think there was a huge fighting in what's the word? There was resistance. There was resistance. So it wasn't as simple as saying, okay, you guys have it because, we don't want to argue with you. It wasn't really that. The history books might make it sound like that, but it really wasn't ever a
Well,
surrendering.
they think of it as being there for them to
Yes.
go in and to take over and to make it just in the format that they're thinking or how they want it to be. So that's how they're perceiving when they go and they try to and they take over and they convince you that this is the way.
Mhm.
And if you do put up some defense, okay, their arrogance alone, yeah, right, they'll go after you. They will, you have no meaning because you're not human anyhow. So how could you have ideas or thoughts?
And they make you think you are in the wrong when really they're in the wrong.
Yeah.
And you're trying to stand up for yourself, but no. And I mean, that happens in life, just in regular day-to-day work. And, there's many different nuances of that whole kind of situation.
Oh, they're
So, because their way is the way, apparently.
I highlighted that section.
Yeah.
When she talks about the ego, how expansionism is a part of their ego.
Mm-hmm.
That expansionism is the opposite of love. They don't want to expand themselves because I want to bring you in. I want to love you. I want to extend my, the extended family. No, they're not thinking about the extended family. Your house belongs to me. Eugene, you're sitting in my house.
Yeah.
He's sitting in my house.
Well,
Get it right.
Understand, Sunshine, I really want to talk to you specifically because you asked the question, but everybody could hear it. Understand that what this introduction of this European Asili to the world was a brand new phenomenon. So a lot of times when I hear people talk, they say, oh, human beings always been like this. Their idea of humanism, that we've always been warring and all that wasn't the case. We weren't annihilating and genociding people. I'm talking about as a human beings. This new human behavior caught everybody in the planet by surprise because nobody thought about genocidal. They never had genocidal thoughts, like obliterating people and doing whatever it took, because they were not afraid. They were like so when the European came out of Europe and discovered that there wasn't that many human beings, and they already had this grand idea that they were on top of the world, and then later discovered there wasn't. This is where all the nations met up and was like, oh, we better unify because we are the smallest in numbers. And at one time they tried breeding, like making us whiter. And what they discover is that wasn't happening. And so they're like, oh, shoot. And this is where Francis Claus Wilson comes with genetic annihilation, right? But this is their weird viewpoint. Instead of like, understanding that race is just a social construct, that human beings are just human beings, instead of thinking about just reintegrating with everybody else, they thought that because of this Asili, they're ready to put a dividing line and trying to maintain this new mutation because of being trapped in the north and the environment creating this pathological culture, bro. I mean, like it's like schizophrenic to the point where they is me, and that's it. And so the surrendering, like them discovering, was them using their ideas, religion, manifest destiny. The merchants knew they were just using that as a political tool. Rhetorical ethics again. They were saying that these were the reasons, but the reasons were for psychopathic, sick reasons, right? For materialism, for prosperity and wealth, and stealing everybody's stuff, right? And there was always challenges. There's still challenges because you cannot control a planet, a matrices, right? And so the certain inventions came about, like the television, right? Which was pushing a lot of Westernism, right? And so they're like, okay, let's push this. And then this is where, I mean, even now, they are locking down on, like, for example, YouTube. If you ain't part of the program, they're pushing back on it now, right? Because black folks started discovering, like, yo, we can actually counteract what they do. And a matter of fact, the hip hop in the beginning was that it was a counteraction. And then what did they do? They threw materialism, and then you got the sellouts who were like, okay, we're gonna take this money and we're gonna go popping. And so, but what you do is you sell out for self prosperity. You sell out your family. You sell out the next generation of your kids. You sell out, like, you're not looking at the whole picture. You're looking at just me. And this is what we adopt this, right? This is what we adopt without having any power. We're not, you're selling out for crumbs. You're not manifesting any power. So this is why you don't possess you possess be as a silly. You possess a weaker Asili. You're not possessing a European Asili. You're mimicking them, but you are the weak part. You are the battery Asili. You are a Duracell. That's your Asili. How are they going to use me to continue maintaining power? And so this is what we do, right? And so we don't have that Asili. We're mimicking their behavior. We're operating off of a program that they have created. You did not create it. And they know that if they could control your food, they control your food, clothing, and shelter and security. You don't control that. You're gonna have to make compromises. So, and we don't take no effort to control any of those things. Food, clothing, shelter, and security. We don't want to secure ourselves. Even when I have my own weapons, people criticize, oh, we don't need no guns. I'm like, do you know where we live? Like, what the? Tell that to the Jews when they went after them. I bet you a lot of them would have loved to have had their weapons. Food is another sense of security. They're providing in our community. We're going to save a lot, buying a lot of carbs and all this crazy stuff.
Would health be an additional one to it, like health, or that?
I mean, if you have those four things, health will
You have good
be,
health.
yeah, because you're controlling your food that you're intaking. You actually will have the exercise that you need because you'll be growing your own food or securing your own food. So food, clothing, and shelter and security, that's the way we could develop a real ceiling to counteract what's happening with this program that they have on us. You know, everybody got want to add on or bring a new point? Anybody may have a question or a statement. To what we read. This chapter was long. If y'all have any questions in terms of the history, like what went on, if you don't understand the context of that history, because she put a lot. She put a lot. I mean, those who are older than me, they should be well versed in this when they were talking about Oliver North, even what happened in Nicaragua and all that. That's your generation, right?
Caribbean. I
I
was
lived
like,
through,
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I lived through the Grenada.
Grenada, yeah.
There you go.
Whoa.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was a time of
I
upheaval.
remember that. Yeah.
I remember back in those days, or a little bit before that, is when there was like a revolution in the 70s in the Caribbean, where it's kind of like the Black Liberation Movement, where they had Black Power was the you know the kind of order of the day, and it was a time with a lot of you know um, activity, like political activity within the Black community, but it seemed to it got quenched because I think the invasion of Grenada had something to do with that as well, when they came in and just
Yes. But some of the ideas we were using back then was Wazunga ideas, right? It wasn't something coming from us. Like it was like we were becoming Black Marxists, Black socialists. Those were the ideas. And so like a new people were going into colleges and learning this, and then trying to use the very tool that oppress us to try to free ourselves with those tools.
Yeah.
yeah
And so, but that was
yeah they
that's
just put themselves in a position to fail, really,
yeah it did, you
Yeah.
know.
We were
But
not.
how?
Yeah,
yeah.
we weren't
So it did
accepting of the other
explain
status.
that.
Mhm.
Veronica,
How does it put us in a position to fail? That's the
Veronica
question.
I think Veronica was trying to answer that.
No, not exactly that.
Ah, let us try to throw you that bowling ball right there.
Say something. That's all I'm trying to say. She was trying to say something.
Yeah. I was just thinking too around that time that that was a time when we actually had a little insight as to what it was that they were trying to do to us. And the thing about it, we were actually at this point, we were coming out of that role of the other and starting to create our own. And, you know, it just couldn't be. They couldn't let that happen. So they used us too against our own selves
Yep.
because they went to other islands
That's
and
right.
found those who were really accepting of their status as other, right? And using them then to launch this attack then on Grenada, who was actually coming out of it. And they actually realized that if Grenada had that opportunity to rise, the others who were in that role of the other would start to say, wait a minute here, if Grenada could do that, right? I think it would have enlightened more people, especially in the Caribbean region. It would have enlightened more because there was a lot of sparks in there.
Yeah,
And
it was.
actually, after Grenada, it really suppressed a lot of those other little movements that were starting to arrive.
Well,
So,
the first one was we have to look at the Haitian Revolution, right?
yeah.
And even the one they had, there was a revolution that they had in Africa too,
Mhm,
right? Which they don't talk about that much. But the Haitian Revolution,
mhm,
that was actually one of the first
Mm-hmm.
time where you have such a small population beat all the superpower.
mhm, mhm.
And so what they do to Haiti, right? They suppress it, they
Even
embargoed
today.
it.
Mhm, mhm.
Up until today,
Yeah.
it's still
Mhm,
they use it, right? They during whenever there's like they have a catastrophe, they use those things to impose their will on them again.
mhm,
They use Dominican Republic
mhm.
to they divide the Dominicans they create this dichotomy, right? And then you have a lot of people don't know a lot of Protestant money goes into Dominican Republic and promotes this. Oh, we need a Dominican Republic need to take control over Haiti, unify the island type of idea, and try to try to control the whole island.
Mhm.
And part of that is they really squash Haiti as a
Yep.
Haiti beat the French, the
Oh,
English. Haiti beat the United States, and they had a rule there where anybody who was a slave, if you get to Haiti, you are free.
mhm, mhm,
And if even if you white and you run away from slavery, you could go there and be free. But they're not going to allow you to have any type of power.
mhm.
That was what they were trying to implement there. And it was squashed because it was so important. I'm like, there was no way at that time Haiti was able to be taken over.
Yeah.
Haiti was taken over because people in Haiti
Yeah.
already bit the program,
Mhm,
right? Which, and it was like, okay, we just didn't like how bad they were beating us up during slavery.
mhm,
And so they were like, oh, we don't know how to manage these things.
mhm.
And this is how they came back in. And there's a constant um oppression that goes on to Haiti. And if you look, anybody who tries to start, they have their own worldview and put their nation in order, the Western world looks at them as an enemy and starts sanctioning them. They'll have the CIA there. Just like in Nigeria, Nigeria in the 70s nearly became a superpower until the CIA got involved in the money, you know, and like the drugs. All these things are all interconnected. And the problem is we're not looking at it as a whole again. We have this weird permanent dichotomy in our brain where we don't look at the whole, we just look at the parts. And that's one of the things that they have taught us. That's one of their programs. And so we tend to look at the part all the time. We emphasize on the part and not emphasize in the whole. Like, what is an engine? Okay, if you're just looking at the water pump and you think the water pump is the most important part there, you're going to neglect all the other parts to make that engine run? No, you have to look at the whole engine. When you troubleshooting, you look at everything. You run a diagnostic, the diagnostic machine check everything. Like, it doesn't check just spark plugs, because you may not find the solution. It may not be the solution may not be there. The problem may not be there, so you're not going to have the solution. So you look at the whole picture.
But you
When we
but
look at
but you have to have an understanding that the whole picture is there to be looked at. I think the majority of people, they're not reading Yurugu. They're not really
But
they're
that's not the point being made. I think you're missing
no,
the
no,
point by
no, I
making that
know. What
statement.
I'm saying, Ra, is that sometimes you don't know how to look at the big picture. If you're not aware of certain things, you don't know. If you don't know what to look for, you can't look for it.
No, but your guru is not the only book out there. Like, you're limiting when you mentioned, like, this is why I have a problem with the statement, right? Because you look at the whole. No book is going to teach you how to look at the whole. Your eyes, your
I
brain is going to look at the whole.
agree.
Now, what
But
the book does, what this book does, is it helps you understand more of what you're looking at, right? It puts it into terms, but you know what it is. You just can't describe it. You're not describing it. You don't have the terminology for it, maybe. But people know. You could go around the neighborhood and I could ask people, do you feel like you could achieve what you want to achieve in the United States or in the West, right? And there is a sense of oppression, right? And there's a sense of, like, get from one place to another, there's a whole bunch of obstacles that their group don't get, even in terms of preferential treatments. They have laws, but there's exceptions to the rule, right? Like Donald Trump should have been in jail, right? But there's an exception to the rule. A lot of white people should have been in jail, but there's an exception to the rule. Equally or more than we been in jail. The government submits that. They admit it, right? So there's things out there that's already known, and we could see, but also becomes, we're not accountable to ourselves. We're not holding ourselves accountable. People don't want to be responsible or deal with it for whatever reason. But we're not doing it. And some of it is not just ignorance. Some of it is a choice. And at a certain age, it is a choice.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I think that in order to address any of those things that you're speaking about, it's important to go back to systems. It's important to develop, you know, put your own systems in place in order to do stuff like that, in order to organize, in order to connect. Like, you know, if you don't have your own systems and you're operating out of their system, you're always compromising. You know?
Well, one of the problems is, right, like Lindis will say, a lot of people don't know it. No, a lot of people are just selfish. That's what it is. We have a culture of materialism in this country and in the West, where as long as me and my wife is eating, I'm not really focusing on nobody else.
Individualism.
Yeah, individualism.
Yeah.
And so that disempowers you.
Disempowers who?
You.
I think it might disempower my neighbor, but
it's gonna disempower you. Yeah, but you're gonna be disempowered because it's gonna affect your children.
But if nobody told me that my neighbor was weak, you know what I'm saying?
Well, but you're a selfish individual then you're a selfish individual. And you could be fine with that. And you could be fine with that.
If you're trying to live, like if you're trying to live in, like it reminds me of this dude, Levi, I think his name's Levi Coffin. He was an abolitionist in the United States. And he was a white dude, him and his wife, and they were all involved in the Underground Railroad. They had this they were trying to fund this department store that was not going to buy anybody's, like they didn't want department store to be affiliated with slavery at all. So like they didn't want any goods that went through this department store to have touched slave hands. And it cost them more money than they could to actually sustain the business. So like they couldn't. And it wasn't like somebody like was, you know, I don't know, an individual was like, oh, they're part of the abolitionists, don't support this store. People wanted to support them, but the system was set up in such a way that they was going to bankrupt themselves doing a business that wasn't affiliated with slavery. And I'm saying like
but you're tying that to this. That's a business decision, bro. That's not even related to what we're talking about.
Yeah,
no, it's not.
Yeah, because if you can't, if
you're talking about somebody that made a poor business decision, bro.
It's not a poor business decision, man. Like if you can,
what you talking about? Did they lose business? Did they lose their business?
If I can't turn this into money, then how many people is going to pick up this book?
This is not this. First of all, this. I don't know what are you creating with this, or what's your idea about it? But what you're describing is bad business practice.
Bad business practice to have a company that isn't affiliated with slave labor.
Listen, brother, if you don't understand that that's a bad business practice, you don't understand business. So we can't have this conversation, bro.
Yeah, I don't. Apparently
because
you want to be
because
Cecilia.
because if you are, bro, you completely misunderstand all of this, bro. And bro, it's okay to be. Listen, there are many people just like this that are selfish, right? And they don't even understand how knowing this can actually, if they're selfish, knowing this actually can help them. For example, you would not
How?
make if you would not have made that decision in terms of business.
So I
Using
think
your example,
what
you
he's
would
trying.
not make that decision because
I,
you would have understood the cultural ceiling that exists in the country.
yeah, but
I
I
mean,
think what he's trying to say, Dora, is in order
White
that
people
One
creating a
person, one
business.
person talking, please.
yeah, I think, but I get where Robert's coming from in that he's simply saying that, and it's the same thing I've been saying too, is that the way the system is set up is that if you, as you say, unplug, there's really no unplugging. Like it's be so plugged in that if we unplug, it's like that's the end for us, really. So that's what I
That's you
think.
accepting that.
Huh?
That's you accepting that. That's you accepting that,
But
right?
I'm sure you, if you unplug
The
completely,
European, listen,
they show it
his example was a European who chose, like, I mean, like, really, he's chose a European as an example.
Well, no, well, I maybe that's the example he chose. But what I'm saying is that
And he already told you he's part of he's selfish. He
Okay, guys,
already
I
told
missed
you
the
that.
fireworks. I stepped away for a second. What's the fireworks all about?
That Robert is a selfish dude who don't care
Robert, what
about
you
his
do,
people,
Rob?
right? And then he tried to create a framework of a poor business decision by a dumbass white dude who decided to tie his business to anti-slavery during slavery. That's a bad business decision. I can't actually separate myself and look at with capitalistic eyes and say that's a fool who made that business decision. And then Eugene is trying to be humbly wrapping everything together, and it doesn't make any sense. That this tells me you're not understanding what capitalism is. He made a European. Unmute yourself, Eugene. Unmute yourself. Oh, you wasn't saying nothing. Y'all was talking among each other.
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, I thought you was trying to get a point across, so that's why I stopped.
Well, we tried.
Listen, honestly, I'm gonna give you the fire.
No.
Because there's a listen. We gotta
already
understand
opened the
that a
box.
lot of us
Go in.
are doing what Robert is done. It's about a selfish act. People who like, for example, people who've gone through, like Honduras, we're going through now, right? They walk 1,000 miles to get away from what they're dealing with, right? And trying to create something, right? Running from that disaster. There are things we have to understand that we have to admit that some of the stuff we're doing is Wazunga. Some of the stuff that I'm doing is Wazunga.
It is. That's what I'm saying.
And so there are some who are perfectly happy to coon, right, and be selfish. And a lot of us is like that. That's why we haven't got out of our plight. This is not because we can't do it. This is because we got black Wazungas
I
among
agree
us.
with that. But what I'm saying is that yes, we do. All right, I agree we do. But what I'm saying is, even the
Don't
ones,
sugarcoat it. Just don't sugar. Leave the wound open. Leave the wound open.
who are claiming not to be are still involved in the system, regardless of what you try to do. You're in it, you know. So you might say, okay, yeah, I would love to unplug completely, but you're still in it. You're still supporting it.
Right. So to me, that is the $1 million issue, or the biggest issue that we have is how do we function until we get to that system?
Yeah.
How do we function?
We need to try to secure the 4 things I said: food, clothing, shelter, and security. But we don't want to defend ourselves. We don't want to grow. We don't want to create food security. We need land, right? We don't want to combine because we're selfish. We don't want to combine with our neighbors to try to and put money together to buy land to create some level of food security. What the Chinese, everybody else are creating these level of security to try to push back against this domination. But when it comes to Black people, it's impossible.
No, I don't say it's.
When we got Black nations.
I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying is that even though we're doing it, we are, and there are people out there doing it. There are organizations out there working on it, and the
Yes, but we're overcomplicating what part of this book is telling you people are selfish. That's why we ain't getting things done. People are, it's not the education, it's that they bought into it. They see nothing wrong with the status quo. There's people who, like, look at what happened to Haiti. It was the people in Haiti who wanted, they didn't want the brutal slavery, but they just wanted, the reason why they fought is to get rid of the brutal slavery. But they were still looking at the Europeans as, oh, they're the smartest. They're the one who can manage things better. And we have a lot of Black folks that believe like that Europeans are smarter than us. That we have Haitians that say they're French descent. We have Moroccans that say they're from France. We have like people from Mali that say they're from France, because we have I don't know why we haven't talked about it, but there's an anti-African, self-hate that we have among each other. And we deny this level of communalism, right? Because we're more collective thinkers. Like, we would join collectively for personal self-interest. We don't have a communal thing. We would join because we see how I will benefit off of this, right? That's the type of organizations we mostly have. We're not looking at a communal thing.
Wow.
And so
yeah, the Europeans have used the tools well. They've been able to indoctrinate us in their thinking, advertising, they've used in all the mediums, right? In terms of, they took what we believed and switched it around, right? So that you buy into it because there's a ray of truth in there, right? You're seeing a little bit of yourself somewhere in what they're saying, but they're not really saying exactly who you are, what you are. So we're like in this state of confusion, right? We're seeking something. We know there's something there. When we look around us and we see that when there are people who you might think are rising up or being able to pull themselves out, and then you see them crushed and put back down, it is really difficult then to keep going. So that's why you have to find like-minded, like saying, here we are going through this book again, right? And as we're going through the book, we're actually starting to see certain elements. We're now rediscovering for some people, just discovering for others. But our minds have already been mixed.
we have a vain imagination. We're sick.
Yeah, you can.
And we need therapy. We need some African therapy.
But this is a way to start it, because when you start reading through and you start seeing these examples and these incidences that you know of, and it is brought to light, you might not have thought that this is systematic in the way it is. They don't believe this stuff. We do, right? All of this is being
Go ahead, tell them.
right? No, but it's all been constructed for the other, and we are in the position of other, right? So we are absorbing it, and
Not
unless
Robert.
it come out,
Bruh,
oh,
bruh, what you gotta say?
Hey, everyone needs representation, okay? So I'm providing that representation
Okay.
for the group.
no, but he's asking questions, and he's actually putting forward thoughts that are there,
Yeah.
and I mean, this is the reality of how we all are,
What
how
we're dealing with.
all at different
Yeah.
stages. We're all at different levels of thought and thinking. And so you need to hear that, because, you know, when the example that Robert gave, you say, yeah, well, yeah, there were white people who did that. Right now, we're not concerned about the white person and what they did, right? But you know what? Even for them, even it didn't work for them either, trying to come out of their own, stepping out anywhere outside of their own um, reinforce ideas that they want you to believe. Right? They can't even pull it out. So
But
no matter
there's
how
a
hard
history
it is for us,
behind that thought. There was a history behind that thought, and that wasn't explained why they did what they did. Robert didn't explain that. He went quickly about it, and so this is why I mentioned what I mentioned. There's a history behind people doing these things, not for. Is a rhetorical ethic again, and so I'm not going to go through that history because it's not relevant to what we're talking about.
Levi Coffin, this dude was dope. I can certify that.
It wasn't. It's not relevant to what we're talking about, because he's not operating from the position of the other. They were doing this for their own selfish reasons, and he made a poor business decision.
No.
What for people that look like us, it was a shitty business decision.
It was for him too. He could not have a business, right?
Yeah, he ran out of he couldn't, the business couldn't function.
Yeah, it would not been able to function. That's a poor business decision, especially him coming from the Asili that he comes from.
Do we want to keep on this topic? Because I got another button presser for us.
Present.
What topic are you dealing with?
Go.
All right, so in regards to it's really difficult to wrap my mind around the fact that the Asili is like basically just with these guys and doesn't manifest itself in other cultures. I will say, I think with this, in this context, this is kind of one of the first times I've seen in history that this Asili seems to be like everywhere. Like it seems to be the dominant way of thinking. I think that's different, but I still think this Asili manifests at least at the very least in a minority in pretty much every culture.
Can somebody explain to him what the Asili is? Eugene, you have a good way of explaining Asili. Tell him what the hell is Asili again, because this dude, again, he's using Asili wrong.
I had to read the Asili again in the definition after I read this chapter.
Yeah.
So the definition is pretty good.
Eugene's going to read what the definition is.
The definition. The Asili, the way she describes it, is the logos of a culture, within which its various aspects cohere. It is the developmental germ or seed of a culture. It is the cultural essence, the ideological core, the matrix of a cultural entity which must be identified in order to make sense of the collective creation of its members. So it's what is at the heart of you, as we might say, it's what makes you who you are,
Also, read the second chapter on page 204, Robert.
Second chapter.
Second paragraph.
Say that one more time.
The chapter that I've read earlier, 204, the second chapter, it tells you what the Asili is.
The
Second
second
paragraph.
paragraph.
Yeah, second paragraph. Because you
You
have
said
to
20
understand
You said
204.
204, right?
Yeah, 204.
As you talking about where it
It's
says, as Abraham says?
no, the interpretation.
That's not 204.
That's not 204.
I mean 402. Sorry, my bad. I misspoke.
The interpretation offered here leads to quite different conclusions. The concept of Asili helps
Slow
us
down,
to
slow
demonstrate.
down, slow down. You got to digest this.
You
The
know,
concept. Go ahead.
let me read it so Robert can hear it. Because if you're reading it,
No. He has to interact with this.
carry on.
Linda,
The
honestly, you got to stop.
Carry on. It's okay. That was a bad suggestion. Okay.
The concept of Asili helps us to demonstrate the way in which the imperialistic, expansionist, and exploitive drive is inherent and therefore natural in the context of European culture. It is logically generated by the Asili of the culture. This activity and endeavor is not in any way peripheral to the main thrust of the culture. It is not merely an aspect among many unrelated characteristics. It is instead a central theme in European behavior with origins in the core of European ideology. White nationalism and aggression, both cultural and economic, are endemic to the European culture, embedded in its ideological matrix. To reverse the tendency of which European imperialism is a manifestation would be to radically change the basis, the essential nature of the culture itself. In other words, we would be dealing with a different Asili, which in turn would generate a different Utamawazo and Utamororo.
Now, what did you understand in what Eugene read in terms of the definition of the Asili and in this paragraph here? Hold on, my internet freezing.
Natural in the context of European
One second,
culture.
my internet froze a little bit. My internet froze for a second. Can you start over again what you were saying, please?
So, yeah, no problem. From the second sentence, the concept of Asili helps us to demonstrate the way in which the imperialistic expansionist and exploitative drive is inherent and therefore natural in the context of European culture. And so the Asili is what is driving, or like the expansion, the imperialistic and the expansionist is like the physical manifestation of the Asili.
Yeah, I think that's it.
It's not just physical, right? So if you look at the concepts imperialistic, we dealt with that, right? Which is more like we dealt with Judaism as an example of that. And then we dealt with expansionism when we dealt with how that it allowed it to expand. Now the people were not the chosen one. It was more like now if people accept this ideology, then you could be saved. You know, before it used to be just a small number of people. And remember in the past chapters, we discussed how Judaism helped create a sense of nationalism, but it did not allow this expansionism and imperialistic part of this development that was coming from the Asili, right? And so then when we dealt with Christianity and the Romans, they took that and created um, a more imperialistic, a more expansionistic um, framework where now everybody who joins this organization, this culture are being saved. Y'all remember those readings?
Yeah. I wanted to know, did that answer Robert's question? Because he asked the question.
So if I'm not mistaken, and like I said, what isn't connecting is the fact that it's just European. If I'm seeing this and I'm saying imperialistic and
What is my opinion or everybody else's opinion? Why is my internet messing up?
How come that same?
Hold on. My internet froze again. I'm not sure what's going on. Can you repeat that, Robert?
Oh, so I
didn't hear you because my internet froze. My internet froze.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. My internet froze,
Okay.
and I was like, "What's going on?"
So when I read this and I'm saying imperialistic and expansionist, exploitative drive inherit, and then making it seem that's a natural thing is inherent from the Asili. If I'm not mistaken, imperialist expansionist would everybody familiar with like basically 18th century or 18th dynasty Egypt and Tutmosis III? Is that like, would he fall under that type of expansionistic?
You need to explain what you understand. Like
the fact that he conquered like all of what would now be considered the Middle East, and then took the people after he conquered their city, he took their sons and daughters and stuff and trained them as Egyptians for them to go out and then basically run their kingdom according to his own will. That sounds imperialistic and expansionist, and they was able to do it after they got those weapons from the Hyksos, which I was saying from the jump. If anybody gets that type of power, they abuse it. It like that runs inherent with their Asili.
Do you know the history?
I'm saying, like, does Tutmosis III,
let me explain something to make if you want to make that argument, you got to know the history. No, it doesn't fall under the same thing. No,
so it does
because no, listen. By that time, Egypt was conquered, bro. Right? Then in the 25th dynasty, Tahaka came back and re-Africanized Egypt for a small period of time. By that time, Western influence was already there. That's why many of us, we don't look past the 18th dynasty to consider these things to be African, because after that, it's already gone. It's somebody else's idea.
Because if we count the
listen. Do you understand what I'm trying to tell, bro? First of all, I don't want to be doing
make a contact with a white person to all of a sudden.
Hold on. You don't know enough to talk about this. Listen, I don't want to teach history to a history teacher, bro. Like I've been trying to tell you that there's 3 invasions. So you got to understand the history. You can't just we just can't sloppily pick and choose. You got to understand the context of the history. This is why I said no. Hold on. This is why I said you're compartmentalizing. This is why you got to look at the whole. You got to listen. You got to look at the whole.
Last year, I brought this up one last time.
You gotta look. You gotta look at the whole. You gotta look. You're showing me a book. You're showing me a particular time, and I was telling you by that time. Yeah, I mean, you're showing me a book.
No, it's a.
You're not quoting anything. You're not quoting anything, brother.
examples of that in African culture.
You're not quoting anything. The arguments that is being made is that an expansion, right? And you telling me based to what I know, is it that? And I'm answering no, because by that time, Egypt was already conquered. It was done with. It wasn't an African thing.
So 18th and after the 18th, that's not African.
Did you just, I just explained to you what happened after that. I said in the 25th dynasty, hold on. Tahaka went to reclaim and bring back the old ways to Kemet, to the Nile Valley. So you're giving me your version of history is very limited, and you're basing it off anecdotal, something that you read that you haven't even quoted yet, and something. So this is why this is not a productive conversation. You have to know the subject to talk about it. So let's get back to the subject. I already told you no. I said no. And that was a European. Okay. By that time, the Western Asili kicked in. The invaders kicked in. The Wazungas kicked in. What they called the Tamu kicked in. He was taken. There's foreign ideas being taken. And so let's get back to the subject of the book. Now, we kind of dealt with
I have to say this, but it's 9:02 and just time checking.
I mean, if you guys want to stop, we can stop, but we kind of discussed the cultural concept of the other. Veronica kind of dealt with the European versus the non-European. And we weren't talking about, we didn't really get into the cultural other and the European laws.
No, we didn't get into that. Seek and destroy. We didn't get into seek and destroy. When we touched on it slightly, but not.
And the last part, the genocidal part, we didn't deal with that. But a lot of this stuff is like, what a lot of this read is it's history. It's like she mentions a lot of stuff, contemporary stuff that had contemporary historical stuff.
A lot of examples of the violence and the extremes they go into in order to expand their power, and keep the power.
So how I would, any suggestions on how y'all want to deal with this?
I think we should finish reading the chapter.
Oh, are we okay? Eugene just said, I agree. I think we should just finish reading the chapter and see how it all connects back to what we haven't actually discussed. I agree. A lot of towards the end of we finished reading page 447, where it says theories of Euro-Caucasian behavior. But I think it makes sense to read because she's just giving examples of the different aspects of the treatment, right? So it probably makes sense to read. And
I would agree. And everybody else cool with that?
Yeah.
I think it will become more
because
Senia,
the previous chapter.
Sunshine. Everybody cool with finishing the chapter?
Reading. Yes.
Yeah, we're still cracking it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I guess that's what we were doing.
I do feel it's going to come together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because like
Robert, hang through this particular chapter, read through this chapter, and I think it will become more clearer.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's not a segmented chapter. It builds and it builds and it builds and it builds. So
Mhm. This chapter is a good read
so
for
that's I think everybody's in agreement. House of Ubuntu, did House of Ubuntu respond?
No.
No. Oh, they're responding.
What was the question?
That's your
She was doing-
trademark statement.
making your seventh baby.
Oh. We're asking,
We
we didn't get to finish everything
were
today.
thinking of finishing the chapter 8, just continuing on,
Just
finishing the reading. Yeah.
reading. Yeah, I think so. I heard you guys, like a lot of it is just history.
Yeah.
A lot of it's
Yeah.
history.
Yeah.
The one part that I did like that we didn't really get to was how the European need the idea of the other. That keeps their culture going.
Mhm,
If you remove that, it's no more European culture.
mhm,
Yeah, it changes. It changes.
Yeah.
mhm.
So and I think that's pretty much the summary of the rest of the chapter.
So does that mean that we finished chapter 8 then? If
I think he meant to say the summary of what we were reading,
Yeah.
not the whole chapter.
chapter 9 then?
No,
It is.
chapter,
Okay.
the rest of chapter 8.
Yeah. But anybody have any closing thoughts before we say Hotep or Shemem Hotep, go in peace?
Shemem Hotep.
Yeah.
Great. I appreciate the knowledge and the learning experience.
Shemem Hotep.
Hotep.
Peace. Hotep, everybody.
Hotep.
Okay, next week it is.
I do too.
Bye-bye.
A learning experience for sure. Yeah.